Someone has said this to you, someone who cares about you. They've said, take care of yourself, get some rest, or don't let that place get to you. But how, Sway? I am a college or university employee. I have a department to lead. I have grants to write. I have funds to raise. I have research to conduct. I have a project that I need to manage. According to Dr. Kim Gordon, there is a way to develop a spirit of rest while doing all of these stressful things. REST is an acronym. I'll tell you what it is in just a second. But what she believes is that it can be done with a spirit of affirmation and validation, even through our work. REST is reflection, reEnergizing, strategizing, and thriving, especially for those folks who come from marginalized communities. So here's what we're going to learn in this episode of I Want to Work There. We're going to learn why it's important for faculty and staff to experience this sense of validation and affirmation in the work that you do. We'll also learn how to incorporate REST, the acronym, in our work. And Kim is going to share the types of leaders that she believes who can help employees develop this sense of rest. Now, about our guest. Kim Gordon is a mindset coach and health equity consultant with a background in child psychiatry. She has her MD from Tulane University School of Medicine and her bachelor's from Xavier University of Louisiana. Now, when you get an opportunity, please like this episode, follow the podcast, and share it. And yeah, by all means, give us some feedback. Okay, here we go with this episode of I Want to Work There. Welcome to I Want to Work There, a podcast that helps colleges and universities boost their brand as employers of choice. I'm your host, Eddie Francis, brand strategy consultant for Edify Ventures. Join me every other week for discussions with some of the best minds in talent recruitment and retention, human resources, and marketing and communications inside and outside of higher education. I Want to Work There is part of the Enrollify Network, a robust collection of podcasts designed to help higher education professionals just like you grow, and explore our other shows at enrollify.org, or check out some of my personal favorites linked in the show notes below. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com. Thank you for joining I Want to Work There. I'm Eddie Francis. Joining us is Dr. Kim Gordon. She's a mindset coach and health equity consultant. Kim, thank you so much for joining me on I Want to Work There. How are you?
I am so great. This is so fun to be here with you today.
Good enough. So Kim and I have found out a few things about each other. We are fellow New Orleanians, which is really cool. Kim graduated from Xavier University of Louisiana. My family has a long history at Xavier and also medical school at Tulane. So you are definitely in the 504, even though you spent some time outside of New Orleans. So it is always very cool to talk to somebody who is from NO. So first of all, tell us about the work that you do. Tell us about the work that you do as a mindset coach, as a health equity consultant. What drew you to it and why are you doing it now?
Well, I think it's like really a blessing to actually be here and talk about my journey in medicine and in psychiatry and how I became to be a health equity consultant and coach. So really a little bit about me. I was born in New Orleans in the 80s. It was a time where I think for the most part, the medical complex, what we call medicine, was still really segregated, although there was an integrated health system. Many Black folks still went to certain hospitals. And my mom was living in New Orleans at the time and went through some challenges with her pregnancy and went to Tulane for help. And that's how I came to be. I was meant to be a twin. My twin didn't make it, but I did. And so it was always that story in me that you're going to be a doctor and you're going to be a doctor at Tulane. And so when I was born, my parents separated shortly after that. Well, actually, probably 2 years after that. And I moved to Monroe, Louisiana. But my hope was always to come back home and become a Tulane doctor. And that's how I went to Xavier. And then from there, went to Tulane. But in my time at Tulane, one of the things that was a challenge for me was really figuring out my place in medicine. And I went into medicine to help the community that I love the most, like African Americans, people of color, women who I had really was raised by, was inspired by, but I saw the inequities in their healthcare. And so it was a challenge for me because no one in my family had ever been a doctor before. Like that was just like unknown. And here I am wanting to do something different, but not necessarily knowing how much assimilation trauma that I would experience in medicine before I could figure out what was my niche, what was important to me. So I ultimately became a child and adolescent psychiatrist. And that was the hope. We got to help the future generations of young folks there,
Yeah.
inspire them. Many of us are surviving in our cultures. I certainly saw what happened with Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans and was a part of the infrastructure to change some of the health inequities that was there in New Orleans. But the trauma was real even before Katrina, even before some of the challenges that I experienced in medicine, or even my mom experienced. And so, what I love about what I'm doing now in health equity is really bringing to light what it feels like to be a person of color, but particularly what it feels like to be a woman of color, particularly Black women, African American women. Many of them may be the breadwinners in their families. They may be single parents. May be married. But African American women are in this country probably the most educated women in this country, but still the most disrespected, undermined, mistreated, whatever. But what happened to me in medicine is that at some point at the end of my early career, I burned out. I mean, it was just like awful. I thought I was going to die. I actually went to doctors wondering what was wrong with me because I was so physically exhausted. But no one knew that. That was my silent burden. I wasn't showing up to work tired or late or not engaged. If anything, I was smiling, laughing. I was pretending like I was okay, but I was suffering silently. And at this time, I already was in the psychiatry field. So it was an extra burden because it was like the stigma of feeling somehow depressed, but you're not really depressed. It's not quite depression. What do you call this? And I didn't know the term for burnout at the time. Ultimately, I did learn about it, but unfortunately, I made some mistakes along the way before I figured out what that was about. So now I'm a health equity coach. I'm helping women of color really understand what burnout is and understand how they can live a successful life without necessarily assimilating to a culture that doesn't meet their needs or define who they are.
This is so interesting. This is the third episode in a row in which burnout has come up. Third in a row. And really it started with episode number 2 when we talked to a guy by the name of Dr. Kevin McClure about the workplace culture of higher ed, and burnout was a big part of his commentary. So I can't wait to get to the rest of this interview, because knowing that burnout is a thing, one of the things that you talk about, and we talked about this before the interview, or at least in prepping for the interview, you talked about folks being able to get a sense of affirmation and validation through work. For some people, that may not make a lot of sense, because some people are saying, no, work is separate. You go and get validation and affirmation in your personal life, and you keep work completely separate. So why for you is it something that people should consider getting a sense of affirmation and validation through work?
Yeah, that's a complex question. And I think some of that, I want to make sure that I own that we have to take care of ourselves outside of the workplace.
Yeah.
Because if we're not taking care of ourselves outside of the workplace, we will ultimately seek validation in places that may not be designed to meet those needs for you. But I do think that there needs to be more belonging and a sense of identity development inside of the workplace. In medicine, we talk about professional identity development, and there's a lot of code switching and words that we use as it relates to professionalism. But really, what I'm getting at when I say that people need to feel a sense of belonging in the workplace is because many of us are coming into the workplace with our callings. We're coming with our unique gifts
Yeah.
that was given directly to us, I believe, by God. And you go and you show up there with that passion to do something good for the world, right? Those change makers. I consider myself a change agent and a change maker. But oftentimes when you go there, you don't understand the culture of the place that you're going in, their mission, their goals, their agendas, and then you lose yourself, right? In the child psychiatry, we talk a lot about positive identity development, learning really early who you are, what you stand for, what are your core values, what make you live a purposeful life. And for me, I always knew those things, but I felt that in order for me to be successful, I had to play the game. You gotta
Mm-hmm.
play
Mm-hmm.
that game, fake it till you make it, assimilate as much as you can, code switch, change your hair, change how you look, how you talk,
Mm-hmm.
who you know. And that is damaging. It's actually eroding the value of diversity in the workplace in the first place. And so I do think that that affirmation and validation in the workplace is really a sense of belonging where who you are, what you bring to the table is not just you, the individual, but all those people that's buying whatever service that you have, like that's buying into either healthcare or buying into a ministry or whatever you are doing. That individual that's coming in with their gifts is bringing all of those people with them. And that's a good thing, right?
Mhm.
So you want to learn about those people. You want to learn about what that person's unique gifts are because they actually make you make more money. But oftentimes, when you go into those cultures, not having a sense of belonging, people just assume things about you. And you may feel like marginalized or you may feel undermined in terms of what your experiences has been. But for me, it was like, oh, your family's dysfunctional. What does that mean, actually? That my
Mhm.
mom was a single parent and she strives to educate her children, but she didn't have a lot of resources. And so things kind of came together at the last minute. Was that really dysfunctional? Or was that a
Mhm.
person who was resource depleted that came into the world with obstacles that met those obstacles with grace and dignity, but yet those individuals in the healthcare profession, oftentimes in child psychiatry, are seen a certain way. And those children are actually experiencing that harm of what people may think about their parents or their caregivers or the people in their lives. But I believe that people do better when they have better. And I believe that we all have a innate ability to help each other if we just believe and trust that everything's of value that comes to us. And
Mhm.
I know I said a lot there.
No, but it was a good lot, and I'm thinking about how one of the conversations that we have had on this podcast, and it's certainly conversations I've had with folks as far as experiencing having a good talent experience in a workplace, is we have this commentary about bringing your full self to work. I always jokingly, whenever people say that, I always jokingly respond, do you really want people to bring their full selves to work? And so, because I know what it looks like when I bring my full self. But I'm getting the sense listening to you that we have to find a way to make two things true at the same time. Because we have folks who will say, okay, this job, and this happens in higher education, you worked in higher education. Higher education is mission based. We go in, we want to change lives, and we just want to do all the good in the world. We want to serve the public good. We want to do all of these things for higher education. So we sink our identities into what we're doing. For me, as a marketing and communications professional, it meant everything for me to do Marcom at 3 historically Black colleges and universities, right? And so that meant so much to me. Yet, when my last opportunity ended, I found myself at this crossroads of, okay, do I just leave that last thing behind because the last situation did hurt me? And so do I just leave that part of my identity behind and do something new? Or can I find a way for those identities to coexist? Because I still have this passion for marketing and communications and higher education. I still have this passion for advocacy of HBCUs. I still have that professional passion that's part of my identity and I value it. At the same time, Eddie's a goofball and Eddie wants to go off and do things. Eddie wants to get back into stand-up comedy. Eddie wants to try radio again. Eddie wants to do all of these things. And at the point I arrived at is, no, I can have all of that. I just need to figure out how to make the puzzle pieces fit. But we hear people say, okay, that situation hurt you, you burned out, leave it behind completely. Don't ever look at it again. Go into a different direction. So I'm getting the sense listening to you that we have to figure out how we can have these identities work together if the passion to do all of that stuff is still there. Is that a fair representation of what you're thinking?
What you said was a lot, and I'm like trying to break it down in like the steps in my mind as you bring it up, because I believe that's what authenticity is. So let me break it down to what I think authenticity means for me.
Please do.
I believe, and I always look up and I need to like look down when we're talking, but I
That's okay.
believe that the best value of love, the best expression of love, God is love, right? And what
Mhm.
he calls for us to do is to engage in our authentic selves in his presence, right? In
Mhm.
worship or in a dedication to, the mission or gift that he gave us. We are like our hands and feet We are the vessels that will go out into the world and bring gifts. But some of us are wounded, like we had things happen, right? And then we lose sight of like that vision, or we don't lose sight of the vision, but we feel like, well, maybe that's not going to work for me anymore. Maybe I need to do something else. But when we decide
Mm.
that when you decide that your journey, your struggle, whatever it may be, was a part of shaping you to be the full, authentic person that you were meant to be in the first place, it changes the way you show up, right? So I understand that when I went into medicine, I was already a coach, but I didn't know how to be a coach yet, right?
Mhm.
So that was one step, right? And I may say, well, I wasn't a great child psychiatrist. That's not necessarily true. It just means that I was meant to be in one position for one part of my life. And then I was meant to grow, grow, grow. And then I go into another position. But growing sometimes requires a little bit of pain, a little bit of pruning, right? When we talked
Right.
about the little trees and how they grow. But think about all the things that happen over in nature that is painful, right?
Mhm.
Storms, winds, rain, all of this stuff that's just been thrown at you. And you're like, am I supposed to be here? Do you just want to knock me down? Like, I don't get it. So I don't believe that anyone should change who they are in any place, but they should know that they're always evolving, right? And so those
Mm,
parts of
mhm.
yourself that was actually good, that seed that was planted, maybe your parents told you, oh, you're going to be a great doctor one day, Kim. That still was good, and I'm going to hold on to that. But there may be other things I heard at Tulane or at some other institution. Why are all these Black people here? They got early acceptance. That's what I heard. And there were doctors who were there who was generations of privileged folks who didn't feel like someone like me deserved to be there.
Mm.
I could have taken that message and that could have been a part of my identity. And for a little while, that inferiority or that feeling, that injury was there. But now I realize they had to say that for me to actually appreciate who I am and what I bring. Because had that hardship not happened, I would not be here today saying, who gives it? Who cares? Who cares what they think,
Mhm.
you know?
Mhm.
And so I think that's how we should think about our journey, and that it is a journey, it's not a destination. All the things that we
Mm.
like. My sister reminded me that when I was a little girl, I was always performing, right? I was always preparing for the next move. Like, I always had a plan. That's still me today. That hasn't changed, but maybe I've become more strategic over the years. But I don't want to lose that side of myself because I go into a place that may not appreciate that about me. If I
Mm.
can change the way people onboard in the work environment, I would say don't onboard people by telling them all the things that you guys do. Like, we're going to ship this at this day. Forget the protocols. Help people understand what your vision and what your mission is and why it's important to you. And maybe they will agree with that vision and mission. And maybe they want to join on too. Or maybe they will actually give you some suggestions that will make it possible for you to connect with folks that you wouldn't have been able to connect to anyway, had you not shared your dream, right?
Mm.
So some people go in the workplace and they're like, oh, I'm supposed to like do X, Y, and Z. And they don't understand that the people that's up top, the CEO, the C suite, they have a whole idea about what this organization is all about. And then you
Mhm.
become demoralized because you've been working hard, thinking that you're doing what you should be doing. People don't even appreciate it. So it's really important that anybody who has a company, entrepreneurs, things like that, start with getting people opportunities to know what you believe in and what you value. In academics, unfortunately, I feel like oftentimes what they value is productivity. They don't
Right.
necessarily value content development that actually is going to be helpful for people. Like I used to get so frustrated. I'm like, this is supposed to be about equity and making people feel better, but all you guys care is if I actually get my notes done on time. I don't understand. Right? I
Mhm.
understand that we build by writing notes, but people get better not necessarily because a doctor wrote a good note, right? But we have a system that actually has failed us in healthcare for the most part. And I think it's our job as leaders to speak up and say, hey, this is not how healthcare is supposed to be, right?
Right.
Or this is not how marketing is supposed to be. It's supposed to be more than that. It's supposed to inspire
Yeah.
people.
Hey there, it's Mallory, Chief Strategist of Enrollify. Higher ed is facing a leadership crisis. The demands on today's college and university leaders are skyrocketing, and talent is leaving the industry at an unprecedented rate. New leaders like you are emerging, but no one is getting the proper training to be successful. Well, Enrollify is here to change that. Our new course, Lessons in Leadership, taught by Dr. Carrie Phillips, will prepare you to be a confident, empathetic, and effective leader. From systems thinking to adaptive leadership, building culture to handling difficult decisions, this comprehensive online course is perfect for new and aspiring leaders. Don't wait. The course starts September 9th, and for a lucky group of 26 students, we have the option to add interactive sessions with Dr. Phillips for personalized guidance. Visit enrollify.org to learn more.
You're listening to I Want to Work. I'm Eddie Francis. We're talking to Dr. Kim Gordon. She is a mindset coach and a health equity consultant. And so you have an acronym, REST, that you love to talk about. And you love to talk about creating an environment of rest. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's all because of the burnout and falling flat on my face that I learned it. But I realized that I was working hard, but I wasn't working smart. And I certainly didn't feel like, even though I had accomplished a lot in my career, I felt like I hadn't accomplished anything. And sometimes in burnout, we call it compassion fatigue, and we call it a lost sense of purpose or a loss of personal accomplishment, like where people feel like I haven't accomplished much. But really, what's happening with burnout is that we are moving past our capacities, right? We're saying, "Oh, I'm exhausted," but you're exhausted because you're doing more than what was really required. And that may feel unfair when I say that because some people may be like, "Well, you don't understand what I've been through." What I mean by that is, rest is about understanding that our purpose really and our missions are cultivated when we take time to reflect. That's the first part of rest. Reflection requires some meditation, dedication to self care. It requires listening more than talking. It requires being more than doing, right? And that actually is hard because a lot of times people, when they start reflecting, they find out things about themselves that they didn't know was there, right? Like, oh, I'm still hurting because my mom passed away from breast cancer. That happened to me. Or, oh, I really don't have a great relationship with my kids and I really want one. And I'm noticing that when I reflect on my relationship with them or the time I spend with them, I'm not doing a good job. And that hurts, right? So then we get to doing it again because we don't really want to spend that time with that pain. But in reflection, after you reflect, what happens is that you have a renewed sense of purpose because you regain some energy. And that's the E, renewed energy. Energy to actually really strategize around what it is that is needed for sustainability. So once you get that energy, you begin to strategize. You recognize, your failures, but you also recognize your strengths. It becomes your superpower. Oh my gosh, this really works when I spend like 30 minutes in the morning in prayer or 30 minutes in the morning walking or 30 minutes like not picking up my cell phone or looking at my email. This reflection and energy, it makes me feel like a certain way. And then you develop a strategy for self-care, but a strategy for developing boundaries for the people in your life so you can actually take care of yourself and hear from God. And if you don't believe in God, hear from yourself, right? Hear from the inner power within. And that's when our communities begin and yourself begins to thrive, the T, right? We thrive when we give ourselves permission to not engage in a grind culture that's telling us that productivity is the way, right? I have produced more in 12 months than I produced my entire career around the vision that I had for myself. And I did that because I cultivated a spirit of rest, right? But I actually thought that that was going to hold me back. When I took my sabbatical from an academic position, it was a big deal. I mean, I left the position and I took that sabbatical and I made it public. I made it public because I was intentional about saying that in some ways, this healthcare system, the work that I've been doing as a health executive failed me. You failed me because I'm a passionate leader. I have all these things that I can bring, but I also failed myself too. It wasn't that they just did it, I did it too. But taking that time off, I think I've grown exponentially. And I believe other people will do the same thing because you become more aware of what is your purpose, not what other people are defining your purpose is. It wasn't necessarily that I wasn't successful before, but I was being successful for someone else, not for myself. We all have something that's in us that we should be focusing on. And God wants us to listen to that a little bit more.
And I think what we lose sight of because one of the things that we know that burnout does is it causes cynicism.
Mhm.
And a lot of people will say, I'm so sick of doing everything and making this university rich. And I'm tired of all of my efforts going to this university becoming a success story, and I'm not doing it. But again, I think one of those things that I figured out once I got over my burnout, because I had to deal with some serious burnout myself, is I realized, well, again, I can do both. I can work for the good of the institution or whichever institution becomes a client of mine. I can work for the good of that institution. I can dedicate myself to it. It can become part of my identity. And at the same time, I can work for the good of my success at the same time. But Kim, the thing that had to happen is I had to manage my burnout. I had to deal with it. And that was one thing I had the hardest time doing. Like it was hard to deal with the fact that I was dealing with burnout. So here is a challenge. So I had this conversation recently with someone who is talking about burnout. And they said, I don't even know where to start. I don't even know how to deal with it. And at one point I said, I would really love for colleges and universities to develop some sort of system or something to help employees manage burnout. And of course, you can't expect the institution to solve the problem. That's not going to happen. But if institutions can figure out how to put the tools and the resources in place and I know some have really already started trying this. They're doing their level best. They're trying programming and all this good stuff. It's not going to be perfect, and it's not going to be perfect the first time around. But the answer was, I'm not going to wait for them to do it because they're never going to do it.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh man, okay, that man, I wanted to say no, but I understood where they were coming from when they said it, and they meant it. And so, listening to what you're saying, do you think that there is a way for an institution to create an environment where employees can reflect, they can reEnergize, they can strategize, and they can thrive? Do you think it's possible for an institution to create that kind of environment?
Well, I do. I mean, I think I'm very hopeful for that. But I also think that we have a larger ecosystem that has to be addressed first, right? And so every organization has their own ecosystem and the key stakeholders involved. But we have a bigger key stakeholders, which is our nation, right? And I'm not to say that I can change the nation me by myself or even me and you having this conversation. But I do think we have to think about what are the values that we've cultivated generationally that have really led to this predicament that we're in. I get very disheartened when I see young folks that's younger than me that's saying they're burnt out. I'm like, how could you possibly be burnt out? What have you been through?
But they can't, but they are. They're burned out.
They are. And what they're really saying is that our system is not serving them well, right?
Yeah.
Babies need to, like, I remember when I was in elementary school, we took naps, right? We played. Play was a big part of work, right? It wasn't like you're going to be on, the soccer league and you were going to be this big time, like a swim leader or, we have kids now that already have an identity that they haven't even figured out themselves yet. But I remember a time where I was able to cultivate a nap and rest. And, it was a really great time in my young life. We need to start with the babies, first of all. Babies need to feel like they can play. There's a scripture that talks about we must come like a child, right? So I think in each of our systems, we have to think about the kid in us. Like, what would a kid need to do in an organization to feel a sense of belonging, right? They need to play with each other. They need to have conversations with each other. They need to have fun time where food is involved and colors is involved and creativity is involved. And adults love that. Adults, when they get together and they play with each other, they really value each other more. They learn things about each other that they never would have experienced before. It kind of opens the window of communication. So let's start with that. Let's start with actually appreciating that sometimes we have to take a break. I mean, it's everybody need a break. In our country, women, for instance, don't have the necessary time for maternity leave. Men don't either, right? That is problematic. In a country where we have so much resources and we have ways that we can make work easier, we are actually making it harder for people because we value what? grind culture and productivity over
Yeah, I was
rest.
gonna say
Not
it results in
understanding,
bottom line. Yeah.
yeah, not understanding that when people are taken care of, they actually do better. They actually work more. They actually are more committed to your organization, to your mission, to your values, to your
Mhm.
goals. So I do believe that, but I'm also not optimistic enough yet that everybody believes that. And so my goal is not necessarily to change systems, but to change individuals, right? We have to
Mhm.
really work at the heart of each other. Some of us are stuck, and we've been stuck for a long time. And so I can't ask an organization to change unless I know that the leaders are being taken care of and the people who are mid level and the people who are the front line. All of those individuals need someone to not only see them, but believe in their potential, right?
Mhm.
And I think sometimes we get jaded. Like, I mean, I got jaded. My supervisors was the enemy in my head. They're the
Sure.
reason why the system sucks. But in reality, we're all suffering. The CEO is suffering just as much as the person that's a frontline worker. They may have more resources, but they feel depleted the same, right?
Mhm.
Which was a revelation to me that I could be successful, have a couple $100,000 in my bank account, but yet I feel
Mhm.
miserable.
Mhm.
Because when I was
Mhm.
growing, it was like if my mom had $100,000, God, I mean, that would have just been what?
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
That would have
Yeah.
changed the game. But some of us are successful and still miserable. I mean, we have to
Yep.
really question why that's the case. I don't think I have all the answers. I branded myself as Dr. Kim Answers, right? Because I
Mhm.
question the solutions that we've come up with, right? I not only
Mhm.
question it, I question the answer. So I figured I'm going to be Dr. Kim Answers, and I'm going to come to people and we're going to talk and we're going to develop an answer because we haven't figured that out yet. And I think that's how we
Yeah.
should all be. We should be compassionately inquiring every day. Have I figured this out? Have I transformed enough yet? Is there more? Instead
Mhm.
of actually thinking that we have the solutions, because I don't think that this nation or this country or this world have the solutions. I don't think those solutions actually come from us believing that. I think it comes from wanting and aiming for a better world, more equitable world, more just world. That's important to me.
That's an interesting segue into my last question for you, because I always end my interviews asking my guests about the way forward for colleges and universities to position themselves as great places to work, to encourage their employees, their faculty and staff to be ambassadors of that place as a great workplace. And I'm going to shift the question that I was going to ask you into more of a leadership question. You mentioned about leaders having to learn and leaders having to develop. And I am a self-proclaimed leadership geek. I love talking about leadership. I love studying leadership. And I always tell people leadership is neither a title nor a position, it's a process. It is a process because people are going to come on board. They're going to be responsible for all these other people. And they have all of these diverse views and agendas that they have to figure out. They have to manage all of this. And it is a process to figure that out. And it is a process to manage it. And it's going to always develop along the way. So, with all that being said, because I'm of the opinion, like many, that higher education has got to change the way it's got to change its workplace culture. It's got to. That to me, that's just non-negotiable. It's got to change. If we're going to have a positive change in workplace culture across higher education, where people can experience a sense of rest, so that they can serve the students, and help the students satisfy that huge investment that they're making, what kinds of leaders do we need to do this? So, and not just one type of person. I'm talking about presidents, cabinets, boards. What kinds of people do you see needing to make that change? Because the first word that comes to mind for me is maverick, people who are going to actively push against and they're going to disrupt. But what about you? What do you think? Well, I mean, I would love to see a bunch of board members who are discovering their inner child. In a positive way, by the way. I've seen a lot of them discover the inner child in a not so great way.
That's fun.
But I mean, what do you think? If Dr. Kim had to create this really good progressive board that's going to hire a great president who is going to manage a great cabinet to run a great institution and give the students the return on investment that they deserve. How do those leaders look to you?
Yeah, I mean, I just think about the recruitment process and the retention process in most academic places, and they seem to retain the same type of leaders, which I think is unfortunate, right? I mean, not to say that anything was wrong with those type of leaders because they have a little bit of sustainability. And
But it may be too formulaic.
right, they need to be, yeah. So I think that in order for universities and higher education places to grow, is they have to embrace different type of leaders. Like embrace that there's a need for different type of leadership in every department, and even maybe foster an environment that is a collaborative type of leadership. That there's not one hierarchical leader, but there's like a board type of leadership, right? And that you bring in the different type of leadership styles in one place, and you really actually help them understand what their superpower is, and they own their superpower, and they all work together to make their superpower work, and they become a unit, but they actually are a branch. Kind of like the tree. I mean, we look at the tree, oh my gosh, it's so beautiful, but it has like all these units to it, right? And they have purpose. And it may look like one branch is higher than the next branch, but in reality, it's all the same tree. What I mean by that is I consider myself a maverick, a transformational, disruptive leader. I come into organizations, I see what needs to be done, visionary, and I may be highly critical of that. Like, I may be highly vocal of that, but you need those type of leaders. And then you may have somebody that's all about the systems. How is they going to work? They recognize how all of this stuff works, and they say, hey, if we do that, it's going to hurt this and that, whatever. We need those people to be doubters. I call them the doubters, the doubting Thomas. But doubting Thomas has value, right? Peter had value. Peter was a rock. He was foundational. He could do whatever. But Paul was transformational. And the reason why Paul was transformational is because he had a lot of emotions. He felt it all. He felt the criticisms. He felt it all. And he brought his empathic way of seeing the world to Christianity, right?
And you have a view that emotions have inherent value. I mean, you can't just throw them away in the workplace. They're there, and we got to deal with them, right?
Exactly. But in the workplace, particularly in higher level education, people who have emotions are oftentimes, oh gosh, this person's too sensitive. We got to get them out of here. They're too passionate. They need to tone it down. They're kind of getting the students to rile up because the young folks are like liking them. And oh my gosh, so what are we going to do about that? You need those people.
And God forbid if the students protest.
God forbid it. You got the students protest, and they're leaders too, those students. But I think understanding people's emotional style, how they message and communicate is really important in leadership. So really, if I started a company, I would want people to do an assessment of their leadership style, their emotional style, their gifts, what they bring, and really have people understand them. I call it the neuro-distinct world, right? Because we all have our kind of things, but we can be multidimensional leaders, right? And we can have a collaboration. And again, there's no book written about this that I've read so far. So these are just me. Like you said, I'm a geek when it comes to reading about leadership, dysfunctional leadership, good leadership, whatever. But I really love the idea of transformational leadership. And that means that some people have to accept that they're not meant to stay in any one place at any given time. And that's their superpower. Because I think sometimes people get wounded. It's like, what's wrong with me? Like my partner has been in this job for like 12 years and everybody loved him, but me, I'm out the door in like 3 years. That's okay. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're not an effective leader. It just means that you're a transformational change leader. You're a change agent. Yeah. Change is hard. People don't like it. Therefore, they're not going to like you.
Yeah.
If you have a gift for prophecy, right? If you think about Jonah, the reason why Jonah didn't want to go to Nineveh is because he got tired of telling people stuff that they already knew and being the bad guy when people said it. He was like, these people, I'm tired. I don't want to do that, right? You have to be okay sometimes with being the type of leader that brings up something that makes people feel uncomfortable, right? But that means you also have to take care of yourself, because if you're not taking care of yourself, then you're going to take that personally. But it really is people bringing up their own stuff. The last thing I'll share is that in leadership, I love this book, The 4 Agreements. It came out, I think, in 2009. It was a long time ago. But it's still true today. Like, we have to show up differently as it relates to being impeccable with our words, not taking things personally. All of that is really important.
Yeah. Dr. Kim Gordon is a mindset coach, a health equity consultant, and most importantly, a native of New Orleans. Kim, thank you so much for joining me on I Want to Work There.
Thank you. I would love to work with you, Eddie.
I Want to Work There is part of the Enrollify Podcast Network. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional. Our shows help higher ed marketers and admissions professionals find their next big idea and feature a selection of the industry's best as your hosts. Learn from Jamie Hunt, Mallory Wilsey, Seth Odell, Dave Kibbles, Jenny Lee Fowler, and so many other of your favorite leaders in higher ed. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.